Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for June 19th, 2024. Today we're going to be talking about the BRICS and the moves toward de-dollarization, and also the panic that's developing in Europe as the political establishment is facing the worst crisis it's had in years. So let's start with the de-dollarization. There's momentum building toward a new system centered around activity coming from China, Russia, and the global south as a whole. And it's based on the collapse of the current system. Now, the dollar-controlled monetary framework is proving to be obsolescent, but also run by people dominated by greed and special interests who have no concern for the development of the rest of the world, and that's beginning to catch up with them. We see the problem in the West with deficits largely related to the massive expenditures for the military. We see the creation of speculative bubbles which benefit a handful of the wealthy but not the general population. Deindustrialization, anti-growth green policies. Then when it comes to international trade, the abuse of the settlement model, the setting of terms of trade that benefit London and Wall Street, and no process for fair arbitration. And then you add to that the sanctions policy, which targets any country which refuses to submit. So as a result of this, it's not surprising that there's a growing anger and a move toward a new system. And the system includes, for the moment as a transition, trade in national currencies rather than in dollars, the expanded use of the yuan and other national currencies. Another example of this change is the end of the Saudi-US petrodollar agreement, which is a 50-year-old agreement which primarily benefited the United States and Saudi Arabia at the expense of the rest of the world. Now, there's no new currency agreement yet. Some of you are worried, well, what are they going to do? Are they just going to set up another fake currency, another paper dollar, central bank digital currency, and so on? Look, there are a number of proposals being considered. Nothing will be determined before the October conference of the BRICS, maybe not even then. But what they're looking for is a trade settlement system which does not favor the dollar, but which is aimed at increasing not just trade, but overall investment in physical economy and development of new technologies. So that's in process, and there's nothing that's going to stop it, because these countries are tired of being victims of a transatlantic looting operation. And the advantage that they have right now is that many of the people in the West, as I'll mention in a moment, are also fed up with the treatment they're getting from the existing governments. Now, one other factor in this is the growing political isolation of the United States. We hear American commentators all the time saying Putin's going to North Korea because he's isolated and rejected. Well, the isolation is really aimed at the United States and its allies. You have, for example, the situation in Gaza, where the United States is alone repeatedly in the UN General Assembly and even in the Security Council. So the isolation comes from the insistence of the United States in acting to protect the existing unipolar order, which means arming Israel no matter what amount of genocide is being committed by that government, which means more weapons to Ukraine to try to weaken Russia. And the threats to China, whether it's trade sanctions, tariffs, or war over Taiwan, that's what's coming from the United States. And so you have with Ukraine the tale of two conferences. One is the Zelensky-Swiss so-called peace conference with no consensus coming out of it. And what is the actual policy? Well, it was set by the G7. Continue the war in Ukraine and seize the Russian assets and use that to provide $50 billion loan from the West to Ukraine. Now, did the American people agree to that? Well, whether you did or not, it's about to happen. At the same time, you had Putin's proposal, which has the support of Brazil, China, and a number of other countries, that there be a settlement right now, a negotiation process, which could have been done more than 2 years ago. But it was rejected by the West. Now, meanwhile, in Europe, we're seeing a political crisis, which is shaped by the bad decisions on the war and the economy. Take, for example, France, where on June 30th there'll be a snap election to choose a new National Assembly. The reason for that was the complete crushing of Macron's party in the European Union parliamentary vote back on June 9th. At that time, Macron's party got 15.2%. The main opposition, Le Pen party, got 31.5%. The latest poll in France shows Macron at 28% popularity. Now, he's used his power to push through special measures through the legislature, through the assembly, when there was no support for it, like the raising of the retirement age, the support for the green policy. When these are done by executive order, when they're not even allowed to go through the People's Assembly, it generates opposition. And we saw the farmers marching through the streets of Paris and French villages. Similarly, farm demonstrations throughout the whole European Union. But with Macron, he wouldn't even put it to a vote. Now, when he was asked, why call for a snap election when there's obviously opposition to the war, the economy, to your presidency, Macron said he's happy to do it. He said, I threw my unpinned grenade at their legs. Now we'll see how they manage. What he means by that is that he was hoping to catch the opposition off guard and pull out all the stops to get a vote for his coalition. We'll see if it happens, but it's clear that this is a sign of the increasing desperation. Now, in Germany, there's also desperation. The Schulz coalition was crushed as well in the European Union parliamentary elections. The Social Democrats had 13.9%, a huge come down from the fact that the Social Democrats usually are at least a third or more of the votes. The Greens fell to 11.9% and continue to drop. The other coalition partner, the Free Democrats, is at 5.2%. And meanwhile, the specter that they fear is the rise of what they're calling the extreme right and the extreme left. The new party of Sarah Wagenknecht, which got 6.2% when it was just formed a couple months ago. But more importantly, the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, which was slandered as a fascist party, a Nazi party, when in fact their main issues were against German participation in the war in Ukraine and against the European Union. They got almost 16%. In Belgium, the Prime Minister De Croo announced his resignation after the vote. So we're seeing instability throughout Europe, and it's based on, as I said, bad policies and rejection of the voice of the voters. So the question comes up, and by the way, keep in mind, Biden keeps collapsing in the polls in the United States. So the question is, can these leaders in the UK and France and Germany and the US, who have proven that they're controlled by private special interests that operate on the basis of serving the banks and financial institutions such as the military-industrial financial complex, BlackRock, Vanguard, Silicon Valley, is it likely that they're going to change? And if they don't change, how are they going to appeal to the voters? Well, without massive pressure from the people, they won't change. Many of them were shocked by this vote and they're not sure what to do. But they're still, as of the G7 summit and the recent indications, they're going to continue with the war in Ukraine, continue to spend money on arming Ukraine, arming Israel. The United States just announced a new long-term agreement. I think it's $18 billion more to Israel. I'll have that for you tomorrow. But without pressure from the people, it's not going to change, and maybe that pressure is throwing all of these bums out of office. Now, later today, I'm going to be having my weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We'll discuss this. We've had a successful press conference last week, a very successful conference over the weekend. The topic today is, in an existential crisis, think like LaRouche. That will be at 11 a.m. Eastern Time today, Wednesday, and I'll have a link to it in the description section. So hope to see you this afternoon.
The big question, what can we do about it? If we have the power to influence the course of history as individuals, then each of us has a corresponding moral responsibility to muster from within ourselves those capacities which enable us to do our part in shaping the course of civilization. Now, under that rubric, I say, what kind of news is newsworthy? The only news that's worth having is news which performs those functions, which enables government, which enables you as an individual and so forth, better to understand what is happening to this planet, to understand what the developments are that are shaping the course of history, and finally to indicate to you the facts which you need to look at so that you can judge what it is that you might be able to do which can contribute to bringing about a solution, an escape from the collapse of civilization. This is no pipe dream, this is no fantasy, this is real.